So today I thought we could highlight the work of a particular indie developer known as Caiys. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right or not, but let's go with Caiys. I got 3 of their games on sale the other day. They're all great and I got them all for a total of £9. I should say before we get started, in a time when new console games have shot up to ridiculous prices, I love a good deal. Don't we all love a good deal? And even at full price, these games are a really good deal. Spirit's Abyss on full price is about €8, I think. Boneraiser Minions is like £4.50, and Void's Vigil is literally £2.49. And I managed to pick them all up when they were all on sale, and I got them all for less than €9 in total. For the amount you get and the quality you get, I think that's ridiculous. Caiys' website says they're just some UK bloke who likes making homebrewed games. And I had thought, just from playing the games, that this person must be British. Some of the phrasing and the language throughout has a distinct Britishness to it, as does the humour. These games are often very funny. Even though they're really well made, they don't take themselves ultra seriously, so I appreciate that. According to their website, Caiys has made 7 games so far, including one that's just come out in early access, and is working on an 8th, a sci-fi traditional roguelike game called Dead Zoned, which I'll be keen to try out at some point. But the 3 we're going to talk about today are his most recent ones. The early access game called Void's Vigil, and the 2 games he's probably most well known for, Spirit's Abyss and Boneraiser Minions, all available on Steam. I've been meaning to try out Spirit's Abyss and Boneraiser Minions for a while. When you get deep into internet comment sections or articles about recommending indie games or roguelike games in particular, these 2 often come up being recommended as hidden gems. And I've done this fairly often. I've got a book coming out about roguelite games. I've played a lot of roguelites. I've read many comment sections about roguelites. I don't know what took me so long with these 2. They just sat in my Steam wishlist for ages, but better late than never. They're both really good, and the 3rd new one was just a bonus. I had no idea it even existed. So I'll go through all 3 in chronological order, but I'll start out with some of the things they all have in common first. All 3 use the same, or at least a very similar, really cool art style. Same colour schemes, tones, same fonts, and so on. Which really makes you feel like when you play a Caiys game, you're being drawn into a particular world and that everything's taking place within the same kind of extended universe. And their upcoming Dead Zoned game is also designed like this. They're just very instantly recognisable as being games by this developer. They have a really distinctive atmosphere and character and design quality. There's something really evocative about the graphics and the humour in the text in particular. Another thing these games all have in common is that they're all, in some form or another, roguelite games. As most of their games actually are, although they've also made some puzzle games in the past too. Spirit's Abyss, it seems to me, takes a great deal of influence from an undisputed classic of the roguelite genre, Spelunky. Both involve you descending into a randomly generated, destructible dungeon filled with treasures and secrets, and happening across various NPCs and various kinds of power-ups and items to help you on your quest. And this quest unfolds more and more and unfurls more and more secrets and surprises the deeper you get into them. They're also both brutally difficult. Death comes very easily and very quickly. My first run of Spirit's Abyss lasted about 20 seconds, and I think my longest one for about a week was about 6 minutes, and I think my longest one now is like 20 minutes. But I don't want to say that Spirit's Abyss is just a Spelunky rip-off. It's just that Spelunky is a tremendously well-designed game that does a lot of things well, and Spirit's Abyss does a lot of the same things that Spelunky does, and does them right. The procedural generation of the levels is absolutely fantastic. Although each stage has its own theme and feel to it, the levels are generated so well that it feels radically different every time you play it. You really never know what's coming next, and it's always a challenge, and there's gold, treasure, and little tidbits and collectibles hidden in every nook and cranny. For a game where you go through the same stages every time, it still feels varied every time, and that's something that Spelunky also nails particularly well. But Spirit's Abyss still feels like a very different game to Spelunky. Though I'm only still scratching the surface with it, I feel like there's already a lot more variety when it comes to classes and to combat. In Spelunky, the characters all behave in kind of the same way, and both games have bombs in them. But in Spirit's Abyss, you start off with a character who's got a gun or some kind of projectile firing weapon. And there's another character with a sword, and to be honest, they're the only two I've unlocked so far. Spirit's Abyss also leans more into power-ups and persistent upgrades than Spelunky does. In Spelunky, there's a lot of options in terms of the items you can buy in shops or find in the world. But in Spirit's Abyss, there is that, but whenever you get to the end of a level, you're given an option between 3 different upgrades for your character, which carry over to the end of your run. It's overall just a really solid, well-made and challenging game that I've been finding it very fun to knock out a few runs of at a time. And out of every roguelite I've ever played, this is the one that comes the closest to actually being Spelunky, and I mean that as a compliment. I honestly can't tell you that much more about Spirit's Abyss because I haven't got very far in it yet. I think the most levels I've actually managed to do in one run to clear is like 3. Although the further I get into it, the more secrets start to open up, and the more I feel like I'm finding to discover. Every single time I play it, even if I don't get very far, something new and unexpected happens, or I find something I've never found before, or something happens in between stages that I've never seen before, and I'm honestly impressed by just how varied an experience it's been so far. I expect that to continue. It really gives off the impression of being a game that goes really deep once you get into it, where there's a lot to scratch away at under the surface and which rewards persistence. It also has a kind of surreal, off-kilter humour which I appreciate. The tutorial ends with your father teaching you how to use bombs and you blowing him up out of nowhere. And that kind of humour carries over in a big way to Caiys' next game, and easily their most successful so far, I would imagine. Boneraiser Minions, an auto-battler roguelite where you play a necromancer raising an army of the dead to fight off hordes of enemies. The gameplay is addictive, fun, and the systems available are surprisingly complex and numerous. Long after you start and begin to get a handle on the game, you'll be unlocking new possible monsters for your army, new spells, new mechanics, new classes, new features, and meta progression. And it all, like Spirit's Abyss, goes surprisingly deep. Boneraiser Minions is also hilarious. It deserves props just for the sheer number of puns it's able to make out of the word bone. It's the little things, I guess. The humour resonated particularly well with me because it's very British as well as very silly, and there's a lot of slang and colloquial language in there that could really have only come out of the UK. All the text descriptions, the dialogue and so on are a joy to read and really have fun with it. It makes mundane descriptions of things which appear in basically every game of its kind a joy to read and often really funny. I really wasn't prepared for just how many jokes there are packed into this game. And the gameplay is really solid too, and a slightly different take on the survivor-like bullet heaven genre, playing much more like an auto-battler. But it's interesting in that while all the attacks are automated, you're not actually the one doing the attacking. So the way you think about moving and positioning is very different than in most Vampire Survivors-like games. You have to play much more defensively often, because you can't rely on attacks to get you through a group of enemies. I think there's a few exceptions to this, depending on the upgrades and the minions that you take for your army, but for the most part, you don't actually do any attacking yourself. I've also been genuinely surprised at the amount of features and mechanics that are in the game, which get unlocked progressively the more you play and the better you get. They just keep going and going and going. There's even a full-on trading card game in it, which has nothing to do with the main mode of the game. You unlock cards from playing the normal game, then you go and try to win the trading card game with the cards you've earned. But Caiys' most recent effort, which was released into early access on September the 16th, is the also excellent Void's Vigil, which is already worth its absurdly low price and will continue to be developed and added to while it's in early access. There's only one mode in it that isn't available at the moment, but another 3 modes are already fully playable, and that trading card game is back. Void's Vigil is also a kind of a take on the Vampire Survivors-like format, but one where you're attacking with a bunch of robots, you're hacking terminals, collecting cogs, which are the game's currency, and trying to achieve computational convergence or something, whatever the hell that means. I honestly have no idea what's going on in Void's Vigil, and I don't need to. There's already a lot of classes to unlock in it, various difficulties, several weapons of different kinds. It's already a very playable experience, so it'll be good to see where it goes in the future. It starts off kind of easy, but it gets brutal quite quickly. The card game, however, is just as brutal as it was in Boneraiser Minions. I get absolutely destroyed in the card game every time. I definitely need to play a bit more and get better cards and, get a bit better at it. So yeah, I kind of like the idea of having a bit of a showcase of the work of a particular developer as a whole for once, rather than just focusing on one game or one genre. I'd maybe like to return to this format at some point, and I'm delighted to give the first episode of this kind of video for us to Caiys. 3 really accomplished takes on roguelite design, each very different and with a distinct vision in terms of gameplay, and yet all still feeling very much like it's part of the same world and still instantly recognisable as the work of the same developer. Void's Vigil still has a way to go. It's just released into early access, but it's already a really solid arcade game. But it's down to people's preferences as to whether they like to buy early access games or not. I've been doing it a lot lately, and I've found it a really interesting way to engage with games and their developers. And with games as a medium especially, because you get to see a bit about how they develop, and because they get updated as they go. It's kind of like whenever there's an update, it's like a new episode of the game is being released, so it just changes the way that you approach playing it. Rather than playing it loads at the same time, you kind of come back to it every now and then. But I guess early access isn't everyone's cup of tea. But whether or not you buy early access games, Spirit's Abyss and Boneraiser Minions are worth any roguelite fan's time. I appreciate I'm late to the party on both of them, but I can't be the only one. Both really fun experiences with very accomplished design, and Boneraiser Minions is genuinely funny to boot. Silly, but funny. So yeah, check out this wonderful developer's games and be on the lookout for their upcoming Dead Zone if more traditional turn-based roguelikes are your kind of thing. This has been Breaking the Game. Thank you so much for joining us. Please like and subscribe if you'd like to see more content about video games, philosophy, and the games industry, that type of thing. It would really help us out, and we'll see you next time.